We will begin here in the UK, where a day after England's reopening, the UK government has warned of an increase in coronavirus-related deaths in the coming weeks. England has lifted nearly all its COVID-19 restrictions. The UK's chief scientific advisor Patrick Vallance, however, says the number of deaths and hospitalisations will not be at the level seen in previous waves because of the vaccination campaign.
We are seeing an increase in the number of deaths, but at a much, much lower level. But they again will continue to increase as infections increase and will be expected to reach over 100, possibly a lot over 100, but we'll see an increase in deaths over the next few weeks as the infections rise, but at a much lower level again because of the protection of vaccination.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson joined the briefing via video link because he himself is isolating. He confirmed he plans to make proof of double vaccination a condition of entry to nightclubs and other crowded venues from the end of September. On Monday, nightclubs in England opened at full capacity for the first time in 17 months.
I don't want to have to close nightclubs again, as they have elsewhere. But it does mean nightclubs need to do the socially responsible thing and make use of the NHS COVID pass, which shows proof of vaccination, a recent negative test, or natural immunity as a means of entry. As we said last week, we do reserve the right to mandate certification at any point if it's necessary to reduce transmission. And I should serve notice now that by the end of September, when all over 18s will have had their chance to be double jabbed, we're planning to make full vaccination the condition of entry to nightclubs and other venues where large crowds gather.
As Britain unlocks, scientists forecast it will soon have more daily new infections than it did in the previous wave earlier this year. On the vaccination front, the UK has decided against giving mass COVID-19 vaccinations to all children and said they will only be offered in certain situations. Children with severe neurodisabilities, Down syndrome, immunosuppression and profound and multiple learning disabilities will be eligible for the vaccine in new guidance released by the government. For more on this, we're being joined now by WION correspondent Chris Jones. And Chris, tell me, what exactly has the government decided and, crucially, why?
Well, yesterday we heard the Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi address the House of Commons and set out a series of recommendations put forward by the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations. Within those recommendations was the advice that 12 to 15-year-olds should be, who are clinically vulnerable, as you've mentioned, so suffer from the likes of Down syndrome and cancer, should be offered a dose of a coronavirus vaccine. That vaccine being the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is the only one that is clinically proven for children in this country. And to add to that, children who are aged 12 to 17 who also live with vulnerable people are to be offered a vaccine too. That's to protect them and to keep hospitalisations low. But despite that, children, the majority of children across the country will not be offered a coronavirus vaccine. That's because they're deemed to be low risk and aren't expected to develop adverse reactions or serious illness and have to be hospitalised if they are diagnosed with COVID-19. But for those children that will receive a coronavirus vaccine, the Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi said that the NHS will be in contact with them as soon as possible.
OK, Chris, thank you. That's Chris Jones reporting from London. A day after talks between the Taliban and Afghan government representatives in Doha failed to yield any results, Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani's blasted the Taliban. He says the group shows no will for peace, and going forward the government will make decisions based on that. Ghani says that Afghanistan's decision to send a high-ranking delegation to Doha for negotiations was an ultimatum. He said, and I quote, The Taliban made clear many things. Mr. Abdullah said that there is no will for peace in the Taliban. We sent the delegation to do the ultimatum and to show that we have the will for peace and are ready for sacrifice for it. But the Taliban have no will for peace, and we should make decisions based on this. He added that he spent the last week working on an urgent and practical plan to overcome the current situation. Ghani says the future of Afghanistan will be made in the country and by the Afghan people. He also claimed that even though the government released 5,000 Taliban prisoners, the militant group, he says, is not ready for meaningful talks. Meanwhile, at least 3 rockets landed near the Afghanistan presidential palace just ahead of Ghani's Eid speech. The attack took place when he and other leaders were praying to mark the start of the Muslim holiday of Eid-a-Adha. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. It's the first rocket attack in Kabul since the Taliban started expanding its control post the US troop withdrawal. The heavily fortified Green Zone houses the palace and several embassies, including the US mission. The attack comes a day after more than a dozen diplomatic missions in Kabul called for an urgent end to the Taliban military offensive, saying it was at odds with claims of wanting to secure a political deal. The two sides have been meeting on and off for months now. No significant progress has been made. The palace was attacked last year as hundreds of people gathered to watch Ghani's inauguration ceremony. This as foreign forces wind up a troop withdrawal scheduled to be completed by August the 31st. Moving on to the United States, where 4 Chinese nationals have been charged with targeting dozens of companies, universities and government agencies in the US and abroad between 2011 and 2018. It comes on the heels of the US and its allies publicly accusing China of a global cyber espionage campaign and calling out Beijing for hacking. China has vehemently denied all allegations, saying they're fabricated out of nothing. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has called the criticism unreasonable and politically motivated.
美国纠集盟友在网络安全问题上对中国进行无理指责，此举无中生有，颠倒黑白，完全是出于政治目的的抹黑和打压，中方绝不接受。
The US Department of Justice has charged Chinese nationals with a global campaign of computer intrusion. The indictment alleges that 3 of the defendants were officers in a Chinese state security agency. The 4th Chinese national is said to be a contract hacker. The White House said it would not allow any economic considerations to prevent it from taking actions where warranted.
Holding back. We are not allowing any economic circumstance or consideration to prevent us from taking actions where warrant. And also, we reserve the option to take additional actions where warrant as well. This is not the conclusion of our efforts as it relates to cyber activities with China or Russia.
The Biden administration's accused China of hacking Microsoft's email server software. The Microsoft Exchange service hack, which came to light in January, affected at least 30,000 US organizations, including local government.
The Chinese government, not unlike the Russian government, is not doing this themselves, but are protecting those who are doing it, and maybe even accommodating them being able to do it. That may be the difference.
Australia is the latest country to accuse China of a global cyber espionage campaign. The Australian Home Affairs Minister says China will be held to account.
They won't get away with it scot-free. They have many nations that have come out and publicly attributed this attack to them. So there is significant reputational damage to China. They have been called out, and we will continue to call out not only China but other nations if they do launch and undertake significant attacks here on Australians and Australian businesses.
The US was joined by a broad coalition of countries like the EU, Britain, Canada and New Zealand in calling out Beijing's cyber activities. Norway says the investigation into the March cyber attack showed it came from actors operating out of China. The Chinese embassy in Norway has requested evidence for these claims. Japan also says its companies have been targeted and that the Chinese government was highly likely behind it. The European Union has also blamed Beijing for targeting the government and economic institutions of its 27 member states. In a statement, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said the hacking was conducted from the territory of China for the purpose of intellectual property theft and espionage. Our US correspondent Caroline Malone reports.
And Western allies blamed China on Monday for what they called malicious cyber activities, including the massive hack on Microsoft Exchange servers. They said there's evidence Beijing's Ministry of State Security used criminal hackers to carry out unsanctioned cyber operations, including for their own personal profit. Well, some of the cases include ransomware attacks on victims in the US, with demands for millions of dollars. Well, the EU, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Japan and NATO joined the condemnation by the US. Well, Washington has not introduced sanctions against the Chinese government, as it did against Moscow for Russian-affiliated hacking. However, the Justice Department has announced charges against 4 Chinese nationals, said to be working with the Chinese Ministry of State Security. It's accused them of targeting dozens of computer systems, including at companies, universities and government entities, and stealing trade secrets and confidential business information.
Catastrophic flooding in Western Europe last week has left behind a trail of destruction. The floods that tore through Western Europe have claimed over 160 lives in Germany alone, making it the country's worst natural disaster in almost 6 decades. Meanwhile, a political blame game is underway over the German government's flood preparedness. The opposition Green parties criticised the government over its warning systems and said the country must prepare better for extreme weather events. The German Interior Ministers called the opposition's claims cheap election rhetoric.
A huge pile of damaged property bears witness to the devastation wrought by last week's deadly floods, as Germany's Interior Minister rejected criticism that the government failed to warn people. On a tour of stricken areas on Monday, including this dam, which was at risk of breach, forcing mass evacuations. The floods that tore through Western Europe killed more than 160 people in Germany alone, making it the country's worst natural disaster in almost 6 decades.
Wir sollten daran nicht rütteln.
Horst Seehofer said flood warnings were up to local authorities because they require local knowledge. An expert on flooding at the UK's Reading University, Hannah Cloak, said the scale of the death and destruction in Europe showed the need for a new approach.
So I could see this information at the beginning of the week, and it looked very serious. It looked like a very worrying flood. So I was very surprised really at the scale of the death and destruction, because from my point of view, it looked like we could forecast this event coming. So something is going wrong in the communication chain of these warnings. Something is going wrong and people don't really understand how much risk they're in, perhaps.
The European floods began on Wednesday and have mainly hit the German states of Rhineland-Palatinate and North Rhine-Westphalia, as well as parts of Belgium. The DWD Weather Service warned last Monday that heavy rain was heading to western Germany and that flooding was very likely. On Wednesday morning, it said on Twitter that the risk of flooding was increasing and called on the population to seek guidance from local authorities. The floods cut off entire communities without power or communications. The German government is readying a relief package for hard-hit communities. One government source told Reuters immediate relief worth around €400 million, or $340 million, was under discussion.
The Tokyo Olympics are drawing closer, but as well as excitement for the Games, growing fears it could be a super spreader event. The so-called bubble to control COVID-19 infections at the Olympic Athletes Village in Tokyo is already broken. Health experts are worried there is growing risk of infection among the general population. Officials have reported the first COVID-19 case among competitors in the Athletes Village. This is where 11,000 athletes are expected to stay. Since July the 2nd, organisers have reported 58 positive cases in total among athletes, officials and journalists.
Visitors, athletes, journalists, delegates, of course they are supposed to be within the bubble, but it's not working well. It's obvious that bubble system is kind of broken. So there seems to be some sort of interaction between guests and visitors and also local people. There's no way for them to track the movement of the people and where they are. And there is no quarantine for the athlete and journalists for extended 14 days. So in theory, if they could have implemented all of the measures which they advocated, it could have been done, but realistically, the bubble is not working. And every day on TV and internet, there are a bunch of videos which suggest that people are just moving around.
On Saturday, Tokyo recorded more than 1,400 daily COVID-19 cases, the highest in 6 months. Experts also warn the city's medical system could reach breaking point. Only 33% of people in Japan have been partially inoculated. This is the lowest rate of vaccination among wealthy countries. In terms of the timeline of all of this, initially non-competitors like staff members tested positive. But last week, 2 South African footballers became the first athletes to return positive tests. Then on Monday, a Czech beach volleyball player was confirmed to have COVID, and then came the case of the US gymnast. Several athletes who came into contact with those who contracted COVID are now also under quarantine. Organisers say they've put several measures in place to contain the spread of cases. Athletes will have to undergo frequent RT-PCR tests. Spectators have been banned from attending the events. Despite this, thousands of people, including athletes, staff and media personnel, will be in Japan for the Games. In 2020, the Tokyo Olympics was one of the last major events to be called off due to the pandemic. However, the organisers and hosts Japan vowed to conduct the Games this year. To Greece now, and Samos Island was once a major centre for the production of traditional wooden boats. These are the handcrafted vessels that are often seen in tourist brochures, postcards and holiday snaps. But now only a handful of these boat builders are left on the island, the last generation with a craft that's dying out.
These traditional wooden boats are an integral part of the Greek landscape. A kaik, the likes of which have sailed the seas around Greece for hundreds of years. Each beam of wood, each plank has been felled, trimmed and shaped by one man alone. Hauled and nailed into place using a technique passed on through generations.
You don't learn this job in a year or two. It takes many years. It's exhausting and a very detailed one. Don't forget that you take wood and you create a masterpiece, a boat.
But the art of designing and building these vessels, done entirely by hand, is under threat. Younger generations aren't interested in this work. They believe that it is physically and mentally draining and has an uncertain future.
Young people don't want to work on boat building because it's heavy work. Although it's an art, but it's also heavy work, tough work. It's manual labor that's tiring.
The demand for wooden boats has also dropped. People are choosing plastic and fiberglass boats as they are cheaper to maintain. 47-year-old Girgos Kiasos is one of the last remaining boat builders in Samos. The island was once a major production center. A few decades ago, there were numerous boat builders here. Now there are only 4. He's been working for 30 years now and says he's still learning.
It's important to have someone experienced, because if you make one mistake, especially in the first stages of building the boat may end up being, well, more of a basin than a boat.
Despite the bleak outlook for his profession's future, another boat builder, 45-year-old Andreas Karamanolis, remains hopeful.
I believe that people will return to the wooden boat. I want to believe it, because the truth is, no other boat has the durability of the wooden boat. Not the plastic ones, not any of them.
Another factor causing a decline in the number of shipwrights is the lack of any formal education. A new museum of Aegean boat building and maritime crafts is being set up in Samos. There is an expectation that a traditional boat building school, which would be Greece's first, will open in the museum. It could help Samos's last boat builders, who work mainly alone due to shortage of assistants. For now, watching their crafts decline is heartbreaking for these creators. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, is writing a memoir about his life that will be published in late 2022. The book will be published by Penguin Random House. The publisher says it will cover Harry's childhood, his military service, including time on the front line in Afghanistan, and also his new life as a husband and father.
Britain's Prince Harry is writing a memoir about his life that will be published in late 2022, publisher Penguin Random House said on Monday. In what's being billed as an intimate and heartfelt book, it will provide a, quote, definitive account of the experiences, adventures, losses, and life lessons that have helped shape him, the publisher said in a statement. Harry and his wife Meghan, formerly known as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, stepped down from their royal duties in early 2020 and now live in California with their 2 children. The pair sent shockwaves through the British monarchy in a March interview with Oprah Winfrey when Meghan accused a member of the royal family of raising concerns about how dark their son's skin might be and said her life as a royal had left her on the brink of suicide. Harry said he feared history would repeat itself after his mother, Princess Diana, died in a Paris car crash in 1997 as she was chased by paparazzi. Buckingham Palace said at the time that the royal family were saddened to hear how challenging the couple's lives had been, and Prince William said the family was not racist.
And can you just let me know, is the royal family a racist family, sir?
No, we're very much not a racist family.
Harry said he was writing his memoir, quote, not as the prince I was born, but as the man I have become.
That is all we have time for on this edition of WION Live Broadcast. We've brought it to you from London. For more global news and updates, do stay tuned to WION World is One.
This is right, Arab.